So today I wanted to come on and answer a question that I get asked all the time. What is it like to start law school old? In other words, what was it like going back to school in my late 20s? Hey guys, it's Fumi. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. Either way, you are welcome. So a bunch of you think I'm much younger than I am. I am 28 years old. I started law school when I was 26 years old. And so I was pretty old as far as law students go starting out. There are a lot of reasons why I decided to wait before going back to law school. I can talk about that in another video, but this is a question that I get asked all the time. And there are definitely pros and cons for going to law school straight through and also for waiting and getting some work experience. Let me just start by saying the biggest thing that matters, the biggest determining factor on how this will go for you is your attitude. It's not an inherent disadvantage. At my law school, it's very small. There's less than 300 students per class, but we have people who went straight through. We have people who came in their late 20s like me. We have people who worked for a year or two. We have people who are in their 40s. We have people who are in their 30s, have families, have children. So there are a lot of different people you'll find at law school, people in different stages of their life. So don't think that your age is a hindrance. It's definitely not a reason for you not to go, but there are some things that you need to be mindful of depending on when you are deciding to go to law school, especially if you are someone who's going in a little bit older. You have that maturity. You have that perspective of having worked for a few years, presumably. You have that perspective of not being a 22-year-old who's been in school their entire life. And that is a huge advantage, especially in an environment that is so incredibly stressful like law school, in an environment that feels like the stakes are so incredibly high. You know, you've been working towards this for such a long time, and this is your terminal degree. So having that maturity and perspective, I think, is key. It's also great to have experience. You have a better idea of what work resonates with you, what work you're good at, because you've spent time in a professional environment. You also have a better understanding of workplace politics and what is appropriate in a workplace environment. That goes a long way, not only when you eventually graduate law school or when you intern, but also just in relating to professors. Being able to relate more like a professional than a student is something that is really helpful to creating relationships with professors and finding mentors who will continue to be important to your life and your career even after you graduate. Experience also means you're probably more clear on your goals and your priorities going into law school. In public engagement for a short period of time, and then I went on to work as a paralegal in big law, and those two experiences gave me different sides of what I could be doing with my law degree. I came in knowing, okay, I want litigation. I've had experience at a law firm. I've seen what that culture is like, but I've also seen what it's like if I decide to go into government. So I had that experience, and it helped me sort of set my priorities as far as which opportunities I wanted to pursue in law school, as well as the extracurricular opportunities I wanted to pursue, the classes I wanted to take, and the professors that I wanted to be really intentional about building relationships with. Coming in older means you probably have a bigger network. If you come straight through, your network is primarily other students, people who you met in undergrad and then maybe high school. But if you come in after a fair amount of work experience, you have that network to draw on. You have that network that you can call on if you need to get a job or if you need connections to someone else in a given city. And I think that's something that's very valuable. So you want to make sure that even when you go back to law school, you're staying in touch with the people who you worked with, any supervisors that you may have, particularly if they are in the industry of legal practice. You want to make sure that you're keeping in touch with them and keeping that bond so that if you do need assistance from them, it's not an awkward thing and you can always go back and cash those checks. You've had a break. I think law school is one of the most challenging things I have ever done to date. And I can't imagine coming into law school having come from undergrad. I think there's definitely a plus in that you're used to the rhythm of school and you have less of an adjustment period. But on the flip side, it is also just very, very exhausting and it leads to higher burnout. So having that change in rhythm is something that's very, very helpful coming into law school from a work environment versus another academic environment. School, you have a lot more time than you do when you're working. Even though it feels like, oh, at work, you know, you can come home and typically you might not have work to continue to do. with school, although you do have work outside of school, you just have a lot more free time. And that's something that I was reminded of this summer, having worked as a summer associate at a firm. The free time that I had this summer was far less than the free time that I have as a student, even with a full course load. So spending time working and being in the workforce gives you those time management skills to juggle a lot of things at once. And I find that people who worked for a long period of time before coming to law school were not only more focused, but a lot less neurotic. The perspective, again, gave them a more realistic view of things. They weren't as easily dejected if they didn't get a good grade. They weren't as easily discouraged if, they bombed a cold call. They just had a lot more perspective to understand, like, listen, I've gone to school, I've worked, and I understand how little a lot of this matters once you leave these four walls. And so that's something that I was really grateful for as a 1L, especially just with the high pressure environment and how competitive it is, and you have cold calls all the time, and you have law school exams. I was grateful for the perspective of like, okay, I've worked before, I know what real life is, and I know that like you want to do well, you want to try your best, but it's not the end of the world if you don't do as well as you had hoped or expected. And this brings me to my next point. If you've come from a work environment, odds are you're a lot more resilient. You need to be resilient to be a lawyer. You need to be resilient to be in 1L and survive all that is. You need to be someone who can fail and pick yourself up and just try again. You need to be someone who's not going to take failure personally. And that's something that you learn on the job. Like, anyone who's worked has made a mistake where you felt like, oh my gosh, they're going to fire me. And then they don't. And then that just gives you, again, perspective. It gives you, a go-getter attitude. It helps you not wallow in your mistakes, but sort of say, okay, how do I fix this? Take responsibility and move forward. Being a lawyer is all about judgment and foresight, right? You apply your judgment to a given problem using the law, and then you try to give your client advice based on the foresight that you have on a given issue. Having come into law school with work experience just lends itself to that skill set. You have experience troubleshooting issues. You have experience dealing with constructive criticism. You have experience making snap decisions. You've probably had responsibility in your given work environment, particularly if you've worked for a number of years. So that's all going to be to your benefit coming into law school and then also practicing law once you graduate.